Professor Richard Baldwin, you've been writing about tariffs for 40 years. You must find yourself in demand a lot recently. Is that correct?
Yes, in a very bad way.
In a bad way because?
Well, we are literally at the cusp of what is potentially the most disruptive phase of international trade since maybe the Great Depression, certainly since World War II. We don't know where this is going to go, but the U.S. has, since World War II, been the adult in the room. Mm-hmm. It has supported the multilateral rules-based system. And much of what is in the GATT and the WTO comes from U.S. law. It was, in essence, a system that was enlightened self-interest, but it advanced America's interest worldwide. It was win-win for everybody. That adult is now throwing toys out of the pram.
Why?
Why is it doing it? I think my argument is that the globalization and automation of the 90s, which led to offshoring and outsourcing, was very disruptive everywhere, as the automations undermined the incomes of people who work with their hands, but turbocharged the productivity of people who work with their heads, and we got this great big divergence in income inequality. In the US, they did not take care of the workers. Most of the rest of the world, the same shock happened, but people had a pension, they had medical care. They wouldn't get thrown out of their apartment if they couldn't pay rent. They helped them adjust to other jobs. In the US, you were on your own. And that was true for Democrats, Republicans, basically since Clinton. They have seen a malaise. And finally, they got very upset, and they elected Donald Trump, who promised to do something about it. And Donald Trump, who has never been on board for this American exceptionalism, leadership, creating the world, is now withdrawing into isolationism, a much older tradition in American politics, and saying, America first, we don't care about the rest, and we're going to go to might makes right. Now, the entire trading system globally is based on the rules, which were based on U.S. support. And when that pulls back, we do not know what's going to happen. So it's exciting in a very, very bad way, in the sense that, you know, I hope it doesn't going to happen. I don't think it will happen. But it is entirely possible that we spin into a trade war that would be of historic proportions.
So I guess when you move from right to might, as you put it, the world becomes incredibly unpredictable as well. And what you're saying is, if I understand you correctly, that the US system was very badly set up for dealing with this type of automation that we've seen in the last couple of decades, and then that was blamed on globalization. Right. And you got the political narrative that then led to the election of Donald Trump. I read an article you wrote a couple of weeks ago, which obviously is a couple of centuries ago in terms of seismic shifts for the international economy. But you were arguing together with two colleagues that central to this new style of government that President Trump has brought into the White House, particularly this time around, is the spreading of a political fog. What do you mean by that?
So the idea is that, I mean, there's two schools of thought here. There's one incompetence and one malevolence. So let's go with the malevolence that a lot of people, and that's where we're going, is that there are goals that they want to change. America does need to change. America, and I'm hoping Trump does it, so I'm hoping it'll work. But they view them as an historical mission to change the way the U.S. works. But since America is the way it is for very good reasons, he has to break a lot of the political logjams to make the changes he wants to make. And by confusing everything, flooding the zone, every single day is a reality show.
Oh, yes.
Where at the end of it, Trump is the hero. You're fired, or he gets to say that every time. And so everything he's doing, like shutting down half of the Ministry of Education, that hardly makes a mention in the press, because they're on to the next thing, they're on to the next thing. So the idea, and this is Steve Bannon, the old advisor, he called it flooding the zone with new stuff. People forget after one day all the big disruptions that are happening. So it's a fog that covers a sort of a, you know, if you want to use military analysis, they put a smoke screen and the soldiers all advance, and when the smoke screen comes up, they're already there. So that's the idea. The other, which and I'm increasingly thinking, because the way he's done it has been so incompetent, is that he lives in an echo chamber where nobody wants to burst his wishful thinking. So when he says, I'm going to put on tariffs on Mexico and Canada, 25% tariffs, which is a big tariff, and that will bring all the manufacturing back to America, and he's feeling so good. And nobody around him is willing to burst his bubble. So then he puts it on, or almost puts it on, and he then figures out that this would actually shut down production of American car companies or keep people unemployed, and then he takes it off. So I'm referring to the most recent one where he said, okay, we're going to put it on. Tuesday, it's on. Then the heads of all the auto industry says, do you have any idea what this would do to American employment and prices? So the next day, okay, not autos. And then probably the guys from the grocery stores came in. U.S. imports 20% or more of fruits and vegetables and beer from Mexico. So do you have any idea what the prices will look like in the supermarkets in the United States next week if you do this? And they, oh, okay, not fruits and vegetables. In fact, now anything that comes through NAFTA. So that kind of, a simple afternoon of staff work could have avoided that. Mm. But I think nobody dared say it until he actually imposed it. And then people outside his bubble talked to him. And then the next day, that doesn't sound like flooding the zone. That sounds like simple incompetence. Mm.
But aren't the consequences the same for the rest of the world? Just this confusing fog, and with economic policy coming out and then being pulled back. And we're in Sweden, Stockholm School of Economics, and we're a small export-oriented country in Europe that has been brought together a lot during the last couple of weeks due to all of this, obviously. But does it matter if it's if there's a grand plan, or if it's just confusion for the sake of confusion and because of incompetence?
Well, I think it does, because here's if Trump and his team are playing 3D chess, then you really need to people figure out what's he doing, why is he doing, what are strategic mode. But if it's really mostly incompetence, and he has urges, as a chief of staff said in the first time, he has urges, grudges, and an overwhelming desire to look good. If it's this incompetence, then he wants to look good. You play him in a very different way. You invite him to meet the king.
Yes.
Not playing careful, like what exports of America that I can hit like this. So you want to make him look good. And Stammer was very effective in this, the White House, the British Prime Minister. Yeah. And then they invited him to see the king with another royal visit. Yeah. So that's how you play somebody who's driven by ego and incompetence. And really what it is a lack of information. People just aren't telling him. In his first administration, people did tell him. He had people around him who told him what the consequences of action would be. So yeah, there we go. It makes a difference.
So in this article from a couple of weeks ago, you do suggest that businesses should look at all of the things that are coming out from Washington and sort of try to judge it along two dimensions to gain some sort of clarity in this political fog. So is this something that he can do by himself and therefore implement in the short term? And secondly, is this something that directly impacts businesses or just indirectly impacts businesses? Do you feel this is still a relevant sort of framework to think from?
Absolutely, for the level of firms.
Okay.
Not for countries. So countries is diplomacy.
Bring the king out, right?
Right. But for companies, lots of companies, anytime you change anything, it's good for some companies, bad for others, and sometimes it's good for some bits of one company and bad for the other bits of the company. So this idea of, first of all, can he actually do what he says he's going to do? Does he have the legal power, the right to do that? And right now it's surprising how much he has. So, but there's still probably some things he's threatening that he can't do or won't do. The other is it going to affect me? And if it's going to affect me directly, then start worrying about it, look for evasive maneuvers, alternatives. But a lot of companies around the world, including a lot of Swedish companies, this is just not important. Either they're not selling to the United States, or what they're selling to the United States is not affected. So I think that's a wise thing at the level of firms.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but not for countries. So what about people around Trump? Because I guess that matters as well. I mean, what's been discussed a lot this week, because somebody has been elected chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, who has proposed very grand massive macroeconomic plan a couple of months ago to basically redo the whole global macroeconomic system, and it contains all sorts of radical suggestions. Is this something we should take seriously?
I would have said no. I read the memo, memo, and he does have a PhD from Harvard, and he was everything in there is extremely radical.
Yeah.
But you could kind of see it happening. And I won't bore you with the details, but basically the trade account is always balanced by a capital account. Because if the U.S. is buying more from foreigners than they are borrowing from us, it must mean that they're holding U.S. assets on net. So there's always an asset outflow that matches the goods inflow. And he's talking about messing up this tariff outflow in order to fix the goods. So it's a radically different approach. I don't think it will work. I'm not sure he'll be able to go ahead with it because it doesn't involve tariffs, which is what Trump's favorite tool is, and the other things. And also, the two of his main advisors are former financial guys, as Bessette and Luknick. They, when they look at this stuff, probably they're going to think that it would lead to a disruption of financial markets, which could be epic in its consequences. Yeah. Make like 2008 look like a small event.
Yes, like a picnic. Yeah,
a picnic.
Yeah.
So I don't think they're going to go that way, but I would have had much more confidence in that statement before I saw some of the things he did on tariffs.
And you're also sitting here telling us that, okay, yes, this guy might have just been elected chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, but don't listen to what he said 2 months ago. That's
No. He's very much on board with that sort of thing. The Council of Economic Advisors, I was on the Council of Economic Advisors for Bush Senior Administration in 1991. I worked for them. And that is not that influential. So it's not a cabinet level post.
Too big of a deal of
He's an advisor.
Yeah.
But these things are so radical, and some people have talked about it. You can't dismiss it.
Century bonds with zero coupons, sort of threatening the Swedish Riksbank that we're going to pull you out of the American nuclear umbrella if you don't exchange existing treasuries for these zero coupon bonds. I mean, that's scary.
No, it's scary stuff. So this is what the gestalt of it. The reason there's an economic, it's not sense. Nobody's ever tried this. Nobody ever thought it was reasonable before. But if you had an undergraduate essay and said, is there any possible way you could stop the trade deficit without tariffs or exchange rate? This would be the clever thing to do it.
Yeah.
So the idea is if people, right now what's happening is people are holding more U.S. assets because their Americans are buying more than they're selling, so the dollars are going out. They hold the assets. That's the way it works. Those have to balance. Dollars out, goods in, that they balance. Now what they're trying to do is mess it up so people do not want to hold those dollars. So then the value of the dollar goes down, then that creates the deficit that moves. That's the idea. So you're trying to mess up the role of the dollar in the international financial system to fix a trade deficit, which is insane to start with. But what I just said was mess up the U.S. dollar role in the international financial system. The whole international financial system is based on the dollar. The banking, all the trading, all the commodity prices, all those things, the reserves at the central bank, those are based on the reliability of the United States to respect its debt, to have free movement of capital, to not do radical regulations. It's why the reason why people don't hold Chinese renminbi, even though it's so big, is what they're moving towards. And that would be a change of the international financial system with unforeseeable consequences.
So they're obsessed with the trade deficits and actually willing to trade their main advantage in the world economy.
Yeah, and if you read the memo, it starts out by people is saying that there's nothing we can do to reduce the value of the dollar, and he goes, that's not true. And then he lists a whole bunch of things that can make it less worthwhile to hold dollars, without then saying, the dollar won't. If that actually worked, the dollar would not be the center of the system. Goodness knows who it would be instead, but the transition would not be a pretty thing.
No. So what has surprised you the most as somebody who has studied tariffs for so long in the last, since January?
Since January, by far the most is either it's incompetence, it's inconsistency and chaos in which this has been done. So you get late night tweets announcing something, sometimes getting the dates wrong, sometimes getting the amounts, and then it's announced, then it's taken off, then it's announced, then it's taken off. That kind of chaos is not what he did in his first term, and it's by no means, nobody ever defines policy as good, where you put something on, then take it off, in a way that it looks like you didn't even do your staff work. Let me do the first one, where he said he was going to put a 10% tariff on all Chinese goods, and everything would be included, including these small packages, which have become a major part of the trade. And so he said those are, those also have to be tariffied and put the tariffs on. Now, right now, they come in unexpected. Tens of millions come in. When he said that, they started piling up at the airports with nowhere to put them. And like, nobody thought this through. There are actually professionals in the US and also professional in the logistic companies who could have told you that there was no way they could put tariffs on all these packages from one day to the next. And when that happened, the post office said, we're not accepting these anymore. And there was that's contradicting what Congress says, so then they had to back off, and then Trump backed off that thing. So that doesn't sound like somebody playing 3D chess. That sounds like somebody who didn't do their staff work.
No.
And so that's what really surprised me,
Yeah.
was that this was coming off the cuff with people who should know better, not informing him, and then it makes it look like a chaos or a circus. And as we talked about before, that could very well lead to a recession in the United States. I mean, all you need is 100 million people say, look, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to wait to buy that refrigerator. I'm going to wait to start the house or a company. I'm going to wait to make that investment because I don't know what's happening to interest rates. I don't know what's happening to prices. And if 100 million people wait, you get a recession. Since demand for investment goods is such a large part of aggregate demand, you get a shift back in aggregate demand and a recession. And I think that, I think it's about 50-50 chance the U.S. will have a recession in the first quarter, and maybe even in the second quarter. And that will be very, very bad, and completely unforeseen.
Yeah.
Not 3D chess.
Yeah. No, didn't we see something similar on a smaller scale with the UK during Brexit? How sort of political uncertainty led to companies just putting off investments and the effects that had on UK growth, right?
Absolutely.
But this is on a much larger scale, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And but it was the same thing. Populists promising things, but they were economically illiterate, basing their economics on something from the 70s. So, the Brexiteers were saying, they'll never put tariffs up because the Germans sell so many cars to us. They forgot to say that the UK car industry is integrated into supply chain, and the car production in the UK has gone way down because they left the single market. And the populists who did the Brexit didn't know about those sorts of things. So it's unintentional harm to the economy by economically illiterate populists. That's the similar thing to it. But you're right about the recession. Remember though that with Brexit, it took a long time.
It did, yeah.
So the vote was on June 2016, immediate reaction. But I think it was 3 years later that they actually signed the deal of going ahead with the new trade deal.
Yes, more than 3 years, yeah.
Yeah, and so there was a long time to sort of sort things out, and then they were going through prime ministers like they were toast, and and eventually they got another election and they said, let's get it done, and they did it in a very harsh way, and it's not gone well.
You did say in the beginning of this interview that you do want Donald Trump to succeed. If he was here, what advice would you give him?
If he was here, I've never met the guy. I've never even been close to the guy, but apparently he has this incredible presence, so it's hard to say things around him. That's what people, I know who've met him, it's hard to contradict him or just because it's charisma.
Okay, if you got to write a memo then.
If I got to write the memo, I would say that, the United States needs a more Canadian or European-like safety net so that you look after workers, not jobs. You need to make sure that the education system comes up so people come through literate, able to take on the jobs. And especially you have to help people with moving, because a lot of what's going on now is people get trapped in depressed areas their housing price goes down, they can't move to where the jobs are because if they sell their house low, they won't be able to buy. So they have to help people adjust. That would be the headline of things. Help workers, protect workers, not jobs. And that is a pretty big change in the way the U.S. would work. But I think ultimately the U.S. has to have better health care. That means more government involvement in health care, needs a better, more systemic education system all around, not financed by local taxes. They need a better old age pension fund so there's not so many poor old people. And I think they need generally more security in the economic life, that people feel that changes or not, they'll have a good chance of being one of the winners instead of just the losers.
Okay. So adapt the economy to this type of globalization in order to secure it for the rest of us, I guess. So yeah, we'll see if you'll get a chance to say this to President Trump or if he will tell you you're fired after that. But thank you so much for
My pleasure.
this. Thank you.
Thank you.